Lee, wonderful to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So help me understand, how significant is this loosening of policy? Is it enough to say that the government is, in fact, abandoning zero COVID?
Well, I think they're going to do it over several months at least. They're basically still going to have certain testing requirements in place for places like hospitals and schools. But it is significant relaxing, given that if someone tests positive, they just can go home and isolate instead of shutting down, entire neighborhoods. So this is going to be, I think, a game changer for its economy going forward.
And I'm sure for the people there, of course, who have been living with this policy for so long. And help me understand, as we said, the government said that it will be prioritizing economic growth in 2023. We know it's not a light switch, right? So when do you think that growth actually starts to materialize? How soon until we actually start to see it in the data, do you think?
So this is assuming that there are going to be no other major setbacks, right? Because we still have to keep in mind that there's a trade war going on with the US, and in fact, there's also a technology war as well. So those issues can still hamper growth in China. But assuming that there are no big new surprises that come up in 2023, I would say that with this loosening of policies, we should start to see, you know, momentum pick up in the spring. Certainly, the winter can still be challenging, given that there might be a lot of illnesses that will force reintroduction of lockdowns. We don't know, but we do know that the variants are a lot less lethal now, and therefore, I think that China will slowly approach normality. And given that there's so much suppressed demand, that people want to socialize, to travel, to do all these things, that it might be quite explosive come the spring. And so this could certainly lift China's GDP, since China is largely focusing on increasing its internal consumption. And so with all that, suppressed demand coming onto the market, that could really drive a lot of growth in China, which can pull in, imports from other neighboring countries like in Southeast Asia and lift the economies in those places as well.
It's interesting, Anne, that you say explosive, because as I try to envision what this will look like, I think about the reopening in the U.S., for example. I think about the reopening in certain European markets. And so you think, based on what we know now, that perhaps in the spring we could start to see a similar reopen in China in terms of really explosive demand, as you say, coming back.
Yes, I think that a lot of people, miss sort of the normal activities, and when they see that they're allowed to do this and that the rest of the world is already engaging in a lot of these activities, I think that the uptake will be very quick. I think that it was pretty explosive in the US as well.
For sure.
Once people were able to get on planes, airlines could not hire enough pilots and staff to meet the really increased demand that suddenly came back online. So I think the
Absolutely.
same thing's going to happen in China.
And what's interesting is I think we're still hearing from airline executives, for example, who are saying that they are still seeing the effects of that pent-up demand. And before I let you go, Morgan Stanley just cut its iPhone shipment estimate by another 3 million units because of slower production. You think about Foxconn and sort of all of the unrest there. I mean, how damaging do you think this long-term will be for China, this policy, and reputationally what it has done in terms of American corporations, multinational corporations? Just wondering, is this really the place that I want to be?
So a lot of that is influenced by geopolitics for sure, given that there are tariffs that the U.S. has imposed, for anything coming from China. Europe has also, joined the U.S. in some of their tariffs and sanctions. And so it's made doing business in China much more difficult. But many companies despite these challenges, have decided not to leave China for good because they cannot find a replacement elsewhere in the world. Uh, China has incredibly good infrastructure that they've built up over the decades, that is really unparalleled. And given that they have a very large uh, population that is also well educated, they can, you know, uh, work on a lot of different areas of the supply chain that are difficult to match in other parts of the world. So when countries try to relocate it to places like Vietnam, like they just couldn't find enough workers. They didn't have the same supply chains available. The infrastructure wasn't there. So when they face these issues, then despite the fact that they may not like some of China's policies, they don't really have alternatives to turn to. Now, this may start to change with the U.S. trying to, uh, you know, build more of a presence in the U.S. by, you know, having TSMC build
Right.
its semiconductor plants in Arizona, and maybe
Right.
slowly the U.S. will try to replicate what has happened in China. But this will take many years,
Mm.
and so in the meantime, countries, companies are
Yeah.
still reliant on China.
I mean, I take your point. It certainly will not be easily done, as you point out, but I certainly think it's a question that a lot of executives are at least thinking about right now after the last few years. Anne Lee, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you. Wonderful to have you.